America was built by individuals and families who followed their dreams. This is their story. My name is Kyrie Dunphy, and welcome to my web series, This is Americana. Today, can you please tell me about your parents and siblings?
My parents and siblings.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with my father.
Okay.
My father was born in Prince Edward Island, Canada.
Yep.
And by the time he was, this is close, I don't know if this is exact in the age, but my understanding is by the time he was 10 years old,
Right.
both his parents had died.
Right. I remember.
And, my understanding is that after they died, a priest tried to find a home for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he stayed with the priest for a couple of weeks before the priest found a home.
Okay.
And so the priest found a home with a married couple whose last name was McDowell.
Hmm.
And my father told me that they were good to him, but that they took most of the money he made,
Wow.
to take care of him.
Mm-hmm.
But he also had a brother whose name was Louis, and so Louis also had to find a home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they found homes in two different homes. My father happened to find a home in a Catholic home. His brother found a home in an Episcopalian home.
Hmm.
And so one thing about my father was that in this family, they must have been a very good Catholic family, because my father had a faith that impressed me my whole life. And I think it was about the age of 21. Now, Prince Edward Island, Canada, has an industry of growing vegetables. They're famous for potatoes and turnips. And they also grow a lot of, it's a green vegetable, soybeans.
Oh. Wow.
And so the other industry is fishing. So my father did a lot of fishing. And at about the age of 21, as I recall, as I remember,
Mm-hmm.
and keep in mind that those two industries are for good weather only.
Mm-hmm.
So in the wintertime, many of the men of Prince Edward Island would go to other parts of Canada, or they would go to the northern states, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and so on. And so my father went to work first in Maine as a lumberjack, cutting down trees and so on. And then for the winter, they would do that. And then in the good weather, they'd go back to Prince Edward Island. And I don't know which time it was, but one of those times, my father was working in Maine. And in Vermont, in that little town I think I've told you about where I
Right.
was born,
Mhm.
in- um, it was a mill town. There were two mills there,
Right.
owned by the same man.
Mhm.
One of them cut um, rough lumber, and the other cut more finished lumber.
Right.
And so this man that owned the mills in North Duxbury needed somebody called a turner. And so there were men working in those mills that had worked with my father in Maine.
Right.
And so this mill owner somehow contacted my father up in Maine
Mm.
and offered him a job in North Duxbury.
Mhm.
And so that's how my father got to North Duxbury, Vermont. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think have I told you about his job as a turner?
Yeah. No?
They had, okay, so it was in the mill that was uh, really literally in my backyard.
Wow.
Was a mill where they brought logs in from the forest,
Wow.
and they had a big vat, like a huge swimming pool,
Wow.
and they would dump those logs in that big vat to wash them off
Yeah.
before they went into the saw,
Mhm.
so that rocks, dirt, little things wouldn't dull the saw.
Right.
And so uh, the log is wrong, but they wanted a square beam.
Mhm.
And so they would pass the log through the saw, and
Mhm.
it would cut off what I would call a slab. And then my father would turn that log over, or 90 degrees or whatever,
Mhm.
so that it would go through the saw again.
Okay.
And so he would do that until the log was a square piece of square piece of lumber. Okay.
Wow.
And now my father in this town, we were the only Catholic family there.
Mm.
And so my father's faith was so great.
Right.
And this town was 5 or 6 miles from the church. And almost every Sunday, and we didn't have a car. I'll tell you about the car in a minute, as I understand it.
Okay.
But every Sunday, my father would walk those 5 or 6 miles one way to church, and
Mm.
then walk back 5 or 6 miles.
Wow.
And so um, his faith was a great influence on me. And
Yeah.
I just gave you one example of why. But
Mhm.
we didn't have a car. Now, my understanding is this, that when my parents were married,
Mhm.
my father purchased a new car.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that in Vermont at the time,
Mhm.
to get a driver's license, all you had to do was go to the registry of motor vehicles
Mhm.
and tell them that you had driven so many hours.
Oh. Mhm.
So my father, according to my understanding, purchased this new car.
Mhm.
And so he was out driving it, trying to learn to drive. And he ran into a tree and wrecked the car. And he never tried after that to drive again or get a driver's license. And I think based on that experience, when I was in high school, when I got to be, I think it was 16, I wanted a car. So my father bought me an old 1932 Chevy
Wow.
coupe. The roof was flat, and the rear window would come down straight, and the back of it would curve over down to the bumper. And so the windshield also from the roof would go down straight and go over the hood,
Oh.
and in that back curved part of the car, you could open up that curved part. It was like opening up a trunk of a car, but this was curved. And so when you opened up the trunk of that car, there were seats in it.
Wow.
And so you could have 2 or 3 people riding in that seat. It was called a rumble seat. Okay. And so my father purchased that car for me. But he would never ride with me until I was about 21 years old. Uh, so, and that was when you think of the car. Well, my father, for years, worked in that mill in North Duxbury.
Right.
And somewhere along the line, my father joined the Knights of Columbus. Yeah, it's an organization that supports the church. And the Knights of Columbus was one of the most important things in his life. And so he would go to Waterbury, that's 5 or 6 miles away, to meetings. And so he went to a meeting one night, and the president of the Knights of Columbus, called the Grand Knight, owned a stone shed where they made from granite. They made memorials for cemeteries and so on. And so the Knights of Columbus also owned this big business building. It had, on the first floor, it had a few stores, and on the second floor, there were apartments. And so the Grand Knight and the owner of the same person, the owner of the stone shed, offered my father a job to work in a stone shed. And for working in the stone shed, he offered my father an apartment in that building, rent free.
Wow.
Yeah, and now by today's standards, I would never think of living in there the way it was. It's been remodeled now.
Oh.
And so he worked in a stone shed for from about 1941, I think it was, and we lived in that apartment.
Wow.
So we had in the apartment was only, I forget how many rooms, but it was a small apartment. It was on the second floor. But on the second floor, the Knights of Columbus had club rooms. They owned the building.
Right.
Okay. And so there was a pool hall.
Cool.
There was a card room where they played cards. And actually on the third floor, there was a dance hall.
Nice.
And so, whereas I never liked the apartment, it had one nice advantage, that during the day I could go into the Knights of Columbus club rooms and play pool. And so I used to bring kids up to, I never would bring anybody in my house, but I used to bring my friends up, like 1 or 2 at a time, and play pool in the pool hall. So it's like I owned all these club rooms. And okay, Dad got that job.
Yep.
In the stone shed. He was a workaholic. Okay. And so his hours at the stone shed were from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. He would then come home from work and he would he would eat his supper.
Mhm.
And then he would go out and he would work for other people.
Yeah.
Usually he chose professional people
Mhm.
like lawyers and doctors and so on.
Mhm.
And so he worked mowing lawns for them.
Mhm.
He worked planting and keeping their gardens. He did, I remember one doctor who was our family doctor, in the basement of his house, it was a part of it was a dirt floor. And so my father made a cement floor out of it.
Nice.
And so dad, I remember dad worked for this one man who owned a department store in town. Uh, so my father, when he did work, he wouldn't collect his pay each week. He had a little tiny little notebook, and in that book, he would just put a mark for every hour he worked in a particular day, and he would keep that book. And so maybe when he decided that he wanted to do something, such as once my mother and my father went to Prince Edward Island to visit, then he would go around collecting his money. And so he went to this guy that owned a department store, and the guy questioned my father's honesty in giving the hours. So my father quit. And but sometime later, that man came to my father and wanted him to come back and work for him. And so my father says, I'll come back if you double my pay. So the guy doubled his pay, and my father went back. So uh, I remember one thing, Dad, they didn't have electric lawnmowers in those days, at least that we had access to.
Mhm.
And so one of the things my father did was mow the lawn of a cemetery.
Wow.
And so he was able to give me work too.
Yeah.
I would help him mow the lawn, for example,
Mhm.
and various other things that he did would give me work as well.
Yeah. What were those other jobs?
Okay, all right. He would wash windows.
Yeah.
He would wash windows for people.
Mhm.
So that would be another example. Um, and I think I helped him pour that cement floor
Oh.
in the doctor's office. Now, this makes me think of another thing about my father.
Yeah.
Uh, in the middle of the winter, one night,
Mhm.
I'm saying it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
Uh, my father that evening had a bad toothache,
Right.
and so uh, eventually he decided to go down to the doctor's office.
Yeah.
Uh, that doctor that he put the cement floor in was our family doctor. And this doctor made home calls.
Right.
And so about late at night,
Yeah.
my father went down,
Mhm.
and the doctor had his office in his own home.
Right.
And he opened the door, and it was a waiting room there, like at the foot of a stairway.
Yeah.
And so it was a very bad night weather-wise. It was icy,
Wow.
and so my father walked down there,
Mhm.
and he was there a long time. And the reason he was there a long time is because the doctor was out on a call.
Mm.
So I'm saying it was probably 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning.
Uh-huh.
My mother woke me up,
Right.
to go down and check on my father. She was afraid he might have fallen on the way because it was so icy.
Mm-hmm.
I went down there in the waiting room, and there he is, my father, sound asleep, snoring, waiting for the doctor to come back. So I waited, and when the doctor came back, now this doctor had an interesting language, so he walked in and he saw my father waiting there. He says, Dan, what the hell's wrong with you? My father said, Doctor, I got a bad toothache. I can't sleep. So the doctor says, what the hell were you doing when I came in? So my father, he also kept a garden for that. But the most I helped him with, I guess, was mowing lawns.
Okay.
Story has its eyes on me. History has its eyes.